The first thing I noticed about Queen Elra wasn't her crown. It wasn't the violet eyes, the ceremonial armor beneath her royal robes, or the dozen alien advisors standing around her throne like they had been born knowing exactly how important they were. It was the exits. There were 4 of them. And Queen Elra knew where every single one was. She never turned her head. She never pointed. She never even appeared to look. But I noticed the tiny movements of her eyes. Left. Upper balcony. Main entrance. Service corridor. Emergency passage behind the throne. Most rulers didn't bother with things like that. They trusted guards to worry about exits. Queen Elra didn't. That told me more about her than any official biography ever could. I stood at the back of the throne room, waiting to be introduced, surrounded by aliens who were all considerably larger than me. The Vexari were built for intimidation. Tall frames. Narrow faces. Long limbs. Sharp features. Humans looked almost ordinary beside them. That was exactly why I had been hired. At least, that's what I thought. A broker named Corin Ash had arranged the meeting. He'd told me the Queen wanted a personal guard who didn't belong to any noble family. Someone outside the court. Someone politically neutral. Someone disposable, if necessary. I had done worse work for less money. When the herald finally called my name, I walked toward the throne. No dramatic entrance. No salute designed to impress the court. Just a steady walk. Queen Elra watched me approach. Her eyes didn't move away from my face. "You are Ethan Marlo." "Yes." "You don't appear interested in impressing me. If you wanted a list of my accomplishments, you would have asked for one." A few advisors exchanged uncomfortable looks. The Queen almost smiled. Almost. Then Counselor Doran Kell stepped forward. He was narrow-faced, perfectly dressed, and possessed the confidence of a man who had never been forced to question himself. "Your Majesty," he said, "I must repeat my objection." The Queen didn't look at him. "Proceed. Humans are physically inferior to several species currently available for this position. A Thelkar guard could overpower this man without difficulty." I glanced at him. He expected me to be offended. I wasn't. "He's right," I said. Kell blinked. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "You agree? On the physical comparison?" "Absolutely." Kell looked pleased. That lasted about 2 seconds. "But you aren't hiring me to win a strength contest." His expression hardened. I continued. "Everyone in this palace knows what a Thelkar guard looks like. Everyone knows how one moves. Everyone knows how to prepare for one." I looked around the chamber. "They won't prepare for me." Silence. The Queen leaned forward slightly. "Your advantage is that you're underestimated. That's one of them." "One?" I shrugged. "I've got 14 years of experience staying alive." That answer changed something. Not in the advisors. In her. Queen Elra looked at me differently. Not like a weapon. Like a puzzle. "You begin tonight," she said. And just like that, I became the personal guard of the Queen of Vashtal Prime. I thought the job would be simple. Stand near her. Watch the doors. Collect my money. Leave when the contract ended. I had no idea that by accepting that job, I had just walked into a conspiracy that would force the galaxy to remember a name I had spent years trying to bury. Because somewhere beneath that palace, people were already studying my photograph. And one of them had just realized something terrifying. The human guard named Ethan Marlo wasn't really Ethan Marlo. At least, not to people who had survived the Kesolene War. My first shift began that evening. The private wing of the palace overlooked Vashtal Prime, a city of gold towers and blue light stretching beneath an alien sunset. I stood outside the Queen's chambers. A servant approached carrying linens. She slowed when she saw me. Then stopped. She stared at my face. Not casually. Not curiously. She looked like she'd seen a dead man walking. Something wrong? I asked. She immediately looked away. No. You sure? You reminded me of someone. Common face. She nodded quickly and continued down the corridor. But she looked back. Only once. And there was fear in her eyes. I filed the moment away. People sometimes recognized soldiers from old conflicts. It happened. I didn't know yet that the servant's name was Mira Soline. I didn't know she had grown up in a colony evacuated during the Kesolene fighting. I didn't know that when she was a child, emergency broadcasts had carried stories about a human soldier who protected evacuation routes that should have been impossible to defend. A soldier nobody could identify. A soldier who almost never spoke. A soldier survivors had eventually nicknamed, the Quiet One. I also didn't know that my face had just appeared on another screen several levels beneath the palace. A woman named Talia Bren was reviewing the Queen's security roster. Most of the names meant nothing to her. Then she reached mine. Ethan Marlo. Human. 14 years private security. Thin service history. Nothing remarkable. Then she opened the identification photograph. Her entire body went still. She stared at the image for several seconds. Then longer. Finally, she whispered, "No." Talia had served during the final years of the Kesolene conflict. She had never seen the Quiet One's face clearly. Almost nobody had. But military intelligence had collected hundreds of survivor descriptions. Different species. Different units. Different battles. Yet the same details appeared again and again. The jaw. The eyes. The stillness. The way he never seemed to move until the moment moving became unavoidable. Talia opened an old archive. Then another. Then another. Every old report pointed in the same direction. She had found him. The man who had vanished after the war. The man entire military units had learned to fear. The man whose presence had once forced commanders to abandon entire offensives. And he was now standing 10 meters from Queen Elra's bedroom. Talia immediately contacted her superior. Corvin Yale listened to the report without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question. "You're certain?" "I'd stake my life on it." Around the table, several operatives shifted uneasily. A younger assassin scoffed. "So what? He's one human." An older veteran slowly raised her eyes. "You weren't there." The younger man laughed. "Neither were you." "I was." The room became quiet. She leaned back. "We didn't lose battles against him. We lost people. Whole teams. Sometimes we didn't even find the bodies." The younger operative stopped smiling. Corvin finally spoke. "Our contract remains. The Queen still had to die. But one rule changed immediately. No one engages the human directly." Corvin looked around the room. "If you see him, you go around him. And if you can't?" Corvin's answer came after a long pause. "Then you pray he doesn't see you first." Back inside the palace, I continued my patrol. Queen Elra tested me during the first week. Random questions. Unexpected movements. Security scenarios. Sudden changes in routine. I passed them all. She never complimented me. She didn't need to. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was beginning to understand that I wasn't simply quiet. I was always watching. The guards. The servants. The advisors. The exits. The shadows. And eventually, I noticed something else. People were beginning to watch me. The palace had become aware of my presence. And one frightened servant had already recognized my face. The only question was how long it would take before someone recognized the man behind it. I got my answer 9 days later. At a diplomatic reception attended by hundreds of guests. And that was the night the first assassin finally came close enough to touch the queen. She never reached her. Because I saw her coming. And when I caught her wrist, she looked directly into my eyes. Her face drained of color. "You," she whispered. Then she said the words I had hoped never to hear again. The quiet one. The reception hall was designed to overwhelm people. Hundreds of guests. Dozens of species. Floating lights. Music. Servants moving constantly between tables. Diplomats laughing while secretly calculating how much they could gain from the queen's next mistake. It was perfect cover for an assassin. Queen Elra knew it. So did I. She had instructed me to stay within 10 paces of her. That was closer than usual. "You seem tense," I told her. "I dislike crowds." "Why?" "Too many variables." That answer made me look at her. She noticed. "What?" "Nothing. You have an opinion." "I always have an opinion." "You simply don't share it." "Usually saves time." A faint smile touched her lips. Then we entered the reception. For nearly 2 hours, nothing happened. That was what made the first movement so dangerous. An ordinary servant crossed the room. Nothing unusual. Except her shoulders. Too rigid. Her eyes weren't following the guests. They were following the queen. I watched her from across the room. She changed direction. I changed mine. She paused. I paused. She waited for a conversation to distract Queen Elra. I didn't. She started walking toward us with a serving tray. I waited until she was 3 steps away. Then I moved. No shout. No weapon. No panic. I simply stepped into her path and took her wrist. Wrong tray. She froze. Set it down. Her eyes met mine. Recognition hit her instantly. Not surprise. Fear. "You. Walk. They told us not to engage you." "Good." I guided her away from the crowd. She didn't resist. That told me enough. The tray contained a concealed compound designed to make the queen appear to suffer a natural medical collapse. Clean. Quiet. Deniable. Someone had planned carefully. But they had planned around a normal guard. Not me. When palace security took the assassin away, I returned to Elra. She was already waiting. "Report. Attempt on your life." Her expression barely changed. "How?" "Poison hidden in a serving tray." "And you knew?" I watched her. "How?" "She wasn't watching the guests." Elra stared at me. "She was watching you," I corrected. "She recognized you." I said nothing. That was enough. Her eyes sharpened. "Marlo." I waited. "You have avoided every question about your past." "Yes." I assumed it was privacy. "It is. Now I'm beginning to think it's concealment. Those aren't always different." She studied me for several seconds. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "I won't force you to answer tonight." I looked at her. "But soon," she continued. "I need to know who is standing beside me." That night, she walked back to her chambers without another word. At the door, she stopped. "You saved my life." "Doing my job." "I don't think that's the whole truth." Then she disappeared inside. I remained in the corridor. For the first time in years, I felt the walls closing in around the identity I'd built. My old life was no longer buried. Someone had found it. And the people looking for it weren't finished. The following afternoon, Queen Elra summoned me to her private study. It was a smaller room. No throne. No advisors. No audience. Just her, me, and a data pad sitting between us. Sit. I did. She pushed the data pad forward. I saw the document immediately. My stomach tightened. It was a declassified military intelligence report from the Kesolene conflict. No name. Only a designation. The Quiet One. Your captured assassin used this name, Elra said. I didn't respond. She was specifically instructed not to engage you. Still nothing. I researched it. She turned the screen toward me. 3 strategic offensives were abandoned because of losses attributed to one unidentified human operative. She looked directly into my eyes. Was that you? For years, silence had protected me. But there are moments when silence stops being protection. This was one of them. Yes. The Queen didn't flinch. She simply leaned back. Tell me the truth. So I did. I told her about the war. I had been young. Too young. My unit had been assigned to protect evacuation routes along the Kesolene border. The colonies were trapped between larger powers fighting over territory neither side truly needed. People were dying because governments wanted maps to look different. At first, I followed every rule. Predictable patrols. Standard communication. Standard formations. Standard tactics. Then people started dying. So I changed. I stopped talking during operations. I stopped broadcasting positions. I stopped moving in predictable patterns. I learned the terrain. I learned how the enemy thought. And eventually, enemy soldiers began to fear entering areas where they believed I might be. The Quiet One wasn't a title you chose, Elra said. No. Then why did you disappear? I looked at the floor. Because the war ended. She waited. And I didn't know who I was without it. That was the hardest part to admit. People didn't want Ethan. They wanted the legend. Some wanted to hire me. Others wanted to kill me. Some wanted to turn me into a symbol. Nobody wanted to know the man underneath. So I changed my name. I left the war behind. I took quiet security contracts. I stayed away from military circles. I became forgettable. Until now. Elra listened. When I finished, she remained silent. Then she said something I didn't expect. I should be afraid of you. I looked up. Are you? No. Why? Because I've watched you. She leaned forward. I watched how you treat servants who cannot help your career. She continued. I watched how you handled the assassin. You could have created chaos. Instead, you stopped her quietly. Her expression softened. That doesn't look like a weapon searching for someone to point it. What does it look like? A man trying very hard not to become one again. I didn't know what to say. Then she added, but there is a problem. Of course there is. The people who hired those assassins know who you are now. I nodded. And they won't stop. She was right. 4 days later, Corbin Yale received an encrypted message. The noble house financing the assassination had lost patience. The message contained only one demand. Results. Within a week. Corbin gathered his remaining operatives. Talia was there. So was the young assassin who had laughed at the old war stories. Corbin placed the palace layout on the table. We stop avoiding him. Nobody spoke. We hit the palace directly. The young operative looked uneasy. You said not to engage him. I did. And now? Corvin stared at the map. Now we have 12 people. The veteran woman shook her head. Numbers didn't help us last time. We don't need to beat him, Corvin replied. We only need to get past him. Talia looked at the palace map. Then at the others. She understood before anyone else did. They had spent weeks trying to avoid the Quiet One. Now they were planning to walk directly into his territory. That wasn't a plan. It was a gamble. And somewhere above them, Ethan Marlo was already noticing small changes inside the palace. A servant reassigned without explanation. A maintenance request for a corridor that didn't need repairs. Unregistered faces near the outer perimeter. A guard rotation altered by exactly 12 minutes. Each detail meant nothing alone. Together, they meant war. I went to Queen Elra. We have a problem. She looked up. What kind? The kind where someone has stopped trying to be clever. She immediately understood. What do you need? Change your routes. Done. Increase security in narrow corridors. Done. And let me inspect the palace myself. She nodded. You think they're coming? I don't think. I looked toward the dark corridor beyond her study. I know. That night, I walked the palace alone. Every level. Every passage. Every blind corner. And somewhere in the darkness, 12 assassins were preparing for the final attempt. They thought they were hunting a queen. They were about to discover they had walked into the territory of the one human soldier they had spent weeks trying to avoid. 3 days before the attack, I found the first altered security record. A guard rotation had been changed. Not enough to attract attention. Just 12 minutes. Most people wouldn't notice. I did. The second clue was a maintenance request. A corridor light had supposedly malfunctioned. It hadn't. The third was a servant. She'd been reassigned from the eastern wing to the western kitchens. The reason given was staffing. The reason in the payroll system was a bribe. The fourth clue was harder. Faces. People appearing near palace deliveries who didn't belong to any registered vendor. They were careful. Professional. They never approached the palace twice using the same route. But professionals have habits too. I began mapping them. By the time I had finished, I knew someone was preparing a large operation. I told Elra. She didn't question me. That was becoming one of the things I respected about her. She didn't need certainty before acting. She needed probability. And the probability was bad. They'll come during a transition, I said. Why? Because that's when your security is weakest. When? Between scheduled inspection and your return to the private wing. She nodded. Then we change it. No. She looked at me. If we suddenly change the route, they'll know we detected them. So let them believe the route is unchanged. Understanding appeared in her eyes. You want to bait them. I want them to choose the battlefield. And if they do. I looked at her. Then they'll choose badly. The palace inspection began at dusk. Queen Elra walked with Counselor Kell and 6 guards. I remained slightly behind. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That was the first warning. A palace that had been tense for days suddenly felt calm. The kind of calm people mistake for safety. We entered the first corridor. Nothing. Second. Nothing. Third. I noticed the lights. They were brighter than usual. Not repaired. Replaced. The corridor had been designed to create shadows. Someone had changed that. I stopped. Elra noticed immediately. What? Keep walking. She did. Kel looked confused. We reached the narrow section. That was when the doors locked. Not with an alarm. With silence. Then the first attacker appeared. Then the second. Then 4 more. Within seconds, the corridor filled with movement. 12 operatives. Armor. Weapons. Professional coordination. The guards reacted. I didn't. I had already seen the positions. 2 at the front. 3 on the left. 4 behind. 3 covering Elra. They had calculated that numbers would overwhelm us. They were wrong. Numbers only matter if your opponent has to fight all of you at once. I moved sideways. The first attacker lunged. I redirected him into the second. A weapon clattered against the floor. The third came from behind. I stepped aside. He struck the wall. The fourth tried to exploit the opening. There was no opening. I had created it. For the next few seconds, the corridor became a series of small decisions. Not a battlefield. A puzzle. One attacker at a time. One angle at a time. One mistake punished immediately. The guards around Elra finally understood what I was doing. Hold position. I shouted. That was one of the rare moments I raised my voice. Don't chase them. The palace guards obeyed. That made the difference. The assassins had expected 6 guards to panic. Instead, they had a formation. And I was controlling the center. The younger assassin from Corvin's network saw me across the corridor. For the first time, he understood. The stories weren't exaggerated. The quiet one didn't fight like a larger soldier. He didn't try to overpower everyone. He made everyone else's strength irrelevant. A fighter attacked from the left. I stepped back. Another advanced from the right. I used the first man's momentum against the second. They collided. The corridor narrowed. Their numbers became a disadvantage. One assassin shouted for the others to surround me. I smiled. That was exactly what I wanted. They closed in. I moved toward the smallest gap. 3 followed. Then 4. The formation broke. The guards pushed forward. Suddenly, the 12-person assault had become a series of isolated fights. One went down. Then another. Then another. Someone tried to retreat. I let him. He ran straight into palace security. The attack had lasted less than 4 minutes. But it felt like an hour. When the final operative realized they had lost, she froze. Talia Bren. She stood at the far end of the corridor, weapon raised. Our eyes met. I recognized her from the security file. She recognized me from the war. Stand down, I said. Her weapon trembled. You know who I am. I know. You know what happens if I surrender. Yes. She looked around. Most of her team was down. Some were injured. Some had fled. None had reached the queen. You could kill me. I could. Why don't you? Because your employer sent you into a fight you already knew you couldn't win. That hit her harder than a threat. She slowly lowered the weapon. The corridor became quiet. I looked toward Elra. She was staring at me. Not with fear. Not anymore. With something closer to realization. She had finally seen the person hidden behind the quiet guard. Not the legend. The man who understood violence well enough to avoid using it when he didn't need to. Palace security arrived seconds later. They took the surviving assassins into custody. I walked back to Elra. Threat neutralized. She looked at the prisoners. Then at me. Again. Yes. You saved my life again. I told you. She stared at me. This is more than a contract now. I didn't answer. But I knew she was right. The attack had changed something. Not just in the palace. In me. For years, I had treated every job as temporary. Every planet as somewhere I would eventually leave. Every relationship as something I should never depend on. But now I had spent weeks protecting people I hadn't expected to care about. A queen who trusted me. A servant who remembered me from a war she had survived as a child. Guards who had started following my instructions without questioning why. And a court that had somehow become something dangerously close to home. Elra approached. I want to speak with you. Now. Yes. She waited until the corridor was almost empty. Then she said, I want you to stay. I looked at her. Your contract can be renewed. That's not what I mean. She stepped closer. I want you as my permanent personal guard. I said nothing. You've spent years protecting your independence, she continued. I know that. She looked toward the palace windows. But I don't think you understand what you've become here. What? Someone who isn't simply hiding anymore. That sentence stayed with me. I had spent years trying to disappear. Now a queen was asking me to stay visible. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to run. But there was still one problem. The noble house behind the assassinations hadn't been exposed. The criminal network was broken. The operatives were captured. But the person who had paid them was still free. And a desperate noble with a claim to the throne had one final move left. A move that wouldn't require 12 assassins. It would require betrayal. The captured assassins gave the palace enough information to identify the network. But not enough to expose its true client. That was deliberate. People like Corvin Yale survived because they built layers between themselves and the people paying them. The palace investigators knew the network. They knew the operatives. They knew the money trail. But the final name remained hidden. Until Counselor Kell found something. A payment authorization. Small. Almost meaningless. A transfer from a noble family's private account to an intermediary company. The amount wasn't enough to buy an assassination. But it was enough to buy information. Someone inside the palace had been feeding the network security schedules. Kell came to Elra with the report. I was there. His expression had changed. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked worried. Your Majesty, we have a problem. Another one? This one is inside the palace. I looked at the document. There were 3 altered guard schedules. 2 maintenance records. 1 visitor authorization. All connected to the same internal access credential. A palace official. Someone trusted. Someone who could walk through restricted corridors without being questioned. I looked at Elra. Don't confront them. Kell frowned. Why? Because if they know we found them, we'll lose the person above them. The Queen nodded. Kell hesitated. You think there's someone higher? I think nobody pays professional assassins twice without having a reason to believe the first attempt failed because of bad luck. Elra looked at me. And you believe this person will make another move? Not another attempt. Then what? Something personal. She understood. The conspirator knew the palace. They knew the Queen's schedule. They knew the guard rotations. They knew me. They would not attack where I was strongest. They would attack where I wasn't looking. So I did something the enemy wouldn't expect. I disappeared. For one day, I stopped standing beside the Queen. Officially, I had been assigned to inspect outer security. Unofficially, I was watching the palace from the shadows. And that's when I saw the betrayal. A senior palace administrator met with a representative of the noble house. They spoke in a service corridor. I didn't approach. I listened. The noble representative was angry. You promised us the queen would be dead by now. The human changed everything. Then remove the human. We tried. No. Your assassins tried. There was a pause. What's the difference? The difference is that we still have people inside. That was enough. I moved. But the conversation continued. The Queen is planning to expose the succession records, the representative said. If she does, House Ver loses its claim. So that was the motive. Not simple greed. Not revenge. A legal succession dispute. Queen Elra's bloodline had been challenged for years by House Ver. If the Queen died, they could force the council to recognize their claim. The administrator asked, and the human? The representative smiled. Give him something he can't ignore. I knew exactly what that meant. Mira. I found her in the kitchens. She was terrified. Guard Marlo. Come with me. What happened? Nothing yet. Her hands trembled. They asked about my family. I stopped. Who? 2 palace officials. What did they ask? They wanted to know if I remembered you from the evacuation. My instincts sharpened. They had figured out the connection. They knew Mira recognized me. That made her a vulnerability. I moved her to a secure room. Then I went to Elra. We need to move. She didn't ask why. Where? Somewhere they don't know exists. She looked at me. You have one. Every palace has one. That almost made her smile. We moved through an old maintenance route beneath the royal archives. But halfway there, the doors opened. Someone was waiting. Not assassins. Guards. Royal guards. Their weapons were raised. Elra stopped. I stepped in front of her. The commander lowered his weapon slightly. Marlo. Commander. You are ordered to step aside. By whom? He didn't answer. I looked at his uniform. No insignia. Fake. The men behind him weren't palace guards. They were soldiers wearing stolen armor. The trap had finally closed. Stay behind me, I told Elra. The first shot came. I moved. The corridor erupted. But this time, I wasn't fighting 12 professionals. I was protecting a queen while facing men who knew the palace as well as I did. That changed everything. We fell back. Door by door. Turn by turn. I used every narrow corridor to reduce their numbers. Elra stayed calm. That impressed me more than any weapon. At one point, we reached a dead end. The fake guards closed in. Their commander stepped forward. You can't win this. I looked at him. Probably not. Elra glanced at me. Then I smiled. But I don't need to. I hit the emergency seal. The corridor doors slammed shut behind the attackers. The palace security system came alive. Alarms erupted across the lower wing. The conspirators realized too late that I'd been leading them into the old security sector. A sector I'd inspected the night before. A sector with automated containment doors. Within seconds, the corridor was divided. The attackers were trapped. Palace reinforcements arrived. The commander surrendered. And with him came the evidence we needed. The noble house. The payments. The internal traitors. The entire conspiracy. But one person was missing. Corvin Yale. He had escaped. And I knew where he'd go. The warehouse. The place where this had started. Elra wanted to send a full team. I refused. Why? Because if Corvin is still there, he'll destroy the evidence. Then take guards. He'll expect them. She looked at me. You intend to go alone? Yes. Absolutely not. That was the first time she had ever sounded genuinely angry with me. I almost smiled. Your Majesty, no. She stepped closer. You don't get to decide that your life is expendable simply because you are accustomed to treating it that way. I stared at her. She stared back. Neither of us moved. Finally, I said, I'll take 2 guards. She crossed her arms. 4. 2. 3. Fine. It was strange. Negotiating with an alien queen about how many people I was allowed to take into danger. It was also strangely comforting. But when we reached the warehouse, we found it empty. Almost. There was one message waiting. A screen flickered on. Corvin Yale appeared. I know you're there, Quiet One. Elra looked at me. Corvin continued. You think this ends with House Vare? It doesn't. You think you've won. I haven't. He smiled. Good. Then the screen went dark. A timer appeared. 30 seconds. I immediately understood. The warehouse wasn't a headquarters anymore. It was a bomb. Run. Elra moved. I followed. The explosion came behind us. The shockwave threw us into the street. When I opened my eyes, Elra was beside me. Alive. Shaken. Angry. She looked at me. Are you hurt? No. You're bleeding. Not badly. She grabbed my arm. You're not allowed to die. I looked at her hand. Then at her face. I'll try. It was the first time she laughed after someone tried to kill her. And somewhere in the burning warehouse, Corvin Yale had already escaped. He was running out of places to hide. Which meant the next time we met, there would be no warehouse. No guards. No political distance. Just him and me. And the Queen would be standing behind the winner. Corvin disappeared for 6 days. That was enough time for House Vare to collapse politically. Enough time for palace investigators to arrest the remaining conspirators. Enough time for the story of the Quiet One to spread across Vashtal Prime. But not enough time for Corvin to forget me. He had built his career around understanding people. He understood fear. He understood greed. He understood how professionals behaved when their plans failed. What he didn't understand was why I kept choosing restraint. That was his mistake. He believed the man from the war was still inside me waiting to come out. He didn't understand that the man from the war had spent years trying to make sure he never had to come out again. Corvin finally contacted the palace. Not Elra. Me. A secure channel opened in my quarters. His face appeared. You've changed. So have you. You were easier to understand during the war. You didn't know me during the war. I knew enough. No. I looked at the screen. You knew the story. His expression tightened. Meet me. Where? The old transit district. Why? Because I have something you want. What's that? He smiled. Answers. Then the connection ended. I told Elra. She refused to let me go alone. This time, I didn't argue. We took a small team. The old transit district had been abandoned decades earlier. Perfect for someone who wanted privacy. We entered slowly. Every sound echoed. Every shadow could have been a person. Then Corvin appeared. He stood at the far end of the station. No army. No guards. Just a weapon at his side. I expected you to come alone. You expected wrong. His eyes moved to Elra. So that's the queen. Yes. You actually care about her. I didn't answer. He smiled. That's what changed you. No. What changed you, then? I thought about the war. About evacuation ships. About faces I'd never seen again. About years spent being feared by people who had never asked what the war had cost me. Then I looked at Elra. Choice. Corvin frowned. I don't understand. That's your problem. He raised his weapon. So did I. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he attacked. He was good. Very good. Not a soldier. Not a typical assassin. He had studied combat systems from several species. He was fast. He was unpredictable. He knew how to exploit hesitation. But he had one weakness. He wanted to prove something. I didn't. The fight moved through the abandoned station. Metal struck metal. Footsteps echoed. He tried to force me into open space. I refused. He tried to provoke me. I ignored him. Finally, he shouted, "Fight me." I am. No. Fight like the quiet one. I looked at him. You don't know what that means. Then I disarmed him. He fell. The weapon skidded across the floor. I could have ended it there. But I didn't. Palace security moved forward. Corvin looked at me. Why? Because you're finished. He laughed bitterly. You think mercy makes you different? No. I looked at him. Choice does. He was taken into custody. The conspiracy was over. The noble house behind it was exposed. The assassination network collapsed. And Queen Elra survived. But the final victory wasn't defeating Corvin. It was realizing I no longer wanted to be the person everyone feared. Back at the palace, Elra found me standing beneath the same windows where I had once spent my first nights guarding her. You could leave now, she said. I know. Your contract is fulfilled. I know. She waited. I want to offer you something. I turned. Another contract? No. She stepped closer. A permanent position. I smiled. You already offered that. This is different. How? You would not be a hired guard. She looked directly into my eyes. You would be part of my court. I was silent. You'd have authority over palace security. That's a lot of responsibility. Yes. I prefer quiet jobs. I've noticed. She smiled. Then her expression became serious. But I am not asking you to become the quiet one again. I looked at her. I am asking Ethan Marlo to stay. That name hit differently. Ethan. Not the legend. Not the soldier. Not the ghost. Me. For years, I'd believed the safest life was one without roots. No permanent home. No permanent employer. No one who could be used against me. But somewhere between the first assassination attempt and the final battle, that philosophy had changed. I had found something I didn't expect. A reason to stay. I'll stay. Her eyes softened. Because of the contract? No. Then why? I looked out over Vashtal Prime. Because this is the first place in a long time where I found something worth protecting that isn't just an assignment. For a moment, Queen Elra said nothing. Then she smiled. Welcome to my court, Ethan. Not Marlo. Not Guard Marlo. Ethan. She was the first person in years to say my name like it belonged to a living person instead of a dead soldier. And that was when I realized something. The war had followed me across the galaxy. But it hadn't won. Because I was no longer running from it. The story spread quickly. The failed assassination. The 12 operatives. The human guard. The old war designation. The quiet one. Criminal networks began circulating warnings. Don't approach the Vashtal palace. Don't underestimate the human. Don't engage him directly. House Vere lost its political future. Corvin Yale's network dissolved. The surviving operatives disappeared into distant systems. And the palace changed. Not because I became more violent. Because everyone finally understood that the Queen's quiet human guard wasn't an ordinary man. He was the man assassins had recognized before the Queen ever did. But the strangest part was what happened afterward. People expected me to become a symbol. I didn't. I remained at Elra's side. I trained palace guards. I walked the same corridors. I spoke with servants. I listened to Kel complain. I watched Mira smile whenever she saw me. And sometimes, late at night, Elra and I stood beneath the palace windows looking over the city. She never asked me to talk about the war unless I wanted to. That mattered. Because for the first time, someone wasn't interested in the legend. She was interested in the person who survived it. Mira eventually told me why she had recognized me. She hadn't remembered my face. Not really. She remembered a silhouette. A human soldier standing between her family and incoming fire. A quiet figure guiding civilians toward an evacuation ship. She had been a child. She hadn't known my name. But she'd remembered one thing. She remembered feeling safe. That was the truth behind the legend. Not fear. Not death. Protection. And perhaps that was why Queen Elra eventually trusted me too. She didn't trust the quiet one. She trusted Ethan. The man who had learned that strength wasn't always about winning fights. Sometimes strength was knowing when not to fight. Sometimes it was standing still while everyone else panicked. Sometimes it was choosing to stay. And after years of running from the person I had been, I finally understood something I should have known much earlier. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was simply a man standing beside someone worth protecting. And this time, nobody was paying me to stay. I chose to. Months passed after the assassination attempt. The palace became quieter. Not safe. Nothing involving royalty was ever truly safe. But quieter. House Vere's political influence was gone. The criminal network that had targeted Elra had scattered. And the name Ethan Marlo had become known across Vashtal Prime. That part bothered me. I'd spent years making sure nobody knew my name. Now people knew it. But something had changed. I no longer cared as much. Because I finally understood that hiding and healing weren't the same thing. For years, I thought if I could stay anonymous, the war couldn't reach me. I was wrong. The war wasn't following my name. It was following what I had refused to deal with. Once I stopped running, it became smaller. Not harmless. Just smaller. Mira was the first person who made me understand that. One evening, we met in the corridor where she'd first seen me. She smiled. I knew it was you. I know. You didn't believe me. I believed you were afraid. I wasn't afraid of you. I looked at her. She shook her head. I was afraid you were going to disappear again. That surprised me. She continued. When I was a child, everyone talked about the quiet one like he was some kind of ghost. What did they say? That he never spoke. Mostly true. That he could appear anywhere. Less true. That he protected the evacuation routes. I nodded. That part was true. She smiled. I think that's what I remembered. What? Not your face. She looked toward the windows. Your position. I didn't understand. You were always between us and the danger. That stayed with me. For years, I'd remembered the war as something ugly. She remembered one part of it as safety. Maybe both memories could be true. Queen Elra became stronger after the conspiracy. Not because she became harder. Because she became more willing to trust. She stopped listening only to people who agreed with her. She kept Counselor Kel. She kept the guards. She kept me. And sometimes she asked my opinion in front of the entire council. That made Kel furious. It also made him respect me. One afternoon, during a security meeting, Kel said, I still maintain that a human is physically inferior to several available species. I looked at him. You're still on this? He sighed. Unfortunately. Elra laughed. The council followed. Kel looked annoyed. But even he was smiling. The palace had changed. And so had I. I no longer stood at the back of rooms trying to disappear. I stood where Elra needed me. Visible. Present. Unashamed. The Quiet One had been created by a war. Ethan Marlo had been created afterward. And now, finally, I was becoming someone else. Someone I had chosen to become. There was one final thing I never told Elra. At least, not for a long time. During the war, I had received an order. An order that would have changed everything. My unit had been instructed to abandon one of the evacuation corridors. There were still civilians there. The command believed the route was strategically lost. I refused. I stayed. That was the night the legend began. Not because I defeated an army. Because I disobeyed an order to save people. Every story that came afterward had grown from that moment. The enemy thought I was hunting them. I wasn't. I was protecting the people behind me. That distinction mattered. And perhaps that was why I couldn't walk away from Elra. Because protecting her was no longer about a contract. She reminded me of the people I had once protected. Not because she was helpless. She wasn't. Queen Elra was one of the strongest people I'd ever met. But even strong people needed someone willing to stand beside them when everyone else wanted something from them. So I stayed. One night, Elra asked me, do you ever regret becoming the Quiet One? I thought about it. Yes. Everything? No. She looked surprised. Why not? Because there were people who survived. She nodded slowly. Then perhaps the name wasn't entirely a curse. No. I looked toward the city. It was just never mine. What do you mean? Other people created it. She understood. The Quiet One belonged to the stories. And Ethan? I looked at her. Ethan belongs to me. She smiled. Good. Then she turned toward the palace. Come. Where? Council meeting. I'd rather fight 12 assassins. She laughed. Too late. I followed her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was walking toward another mission. I was walking home. Years later, people would still tell stories about the human who protected the alien queen. Some would exaggerate. Some would invent details. Some would say I had defeated entire armies alone. Some would claim assassins could recognize me from across a room. Some would insist I had never spoken during the war. Most of it would be wrong. But one part would always be true. The assassins recognized me before the queen did. They saw the old soldier. They saw the reputation. They saw the danger. They looked at my face and remembered a war. Queen Elra saw something different. She saw a man who had survived it. She saw someone who didn't want power. Someone who didn't want glory. Someone who had spent years trying to become ordinary because extraordinary had cost him too much. And she trusted him anyway. That trust mattered more than the reputation. More than the war. More than the stories. Because the strongest thing I had ever done wasn't surviving the battlefield. It wasn't defeating 12 assassins. It wasn't protecting a queen from a conspiracy. It was something much simpler. I stopped running. I chose a home. I chose people. And I chose, freely, to stand beside someone worth protecting. No contract. No orders. No war. Just a choice. My choice. And after everything I'd survived, that was the first victory that ever truly felt like mine.